This is the first installment of Things I've Seen. This will more than likely be one of many videos dedicated to a few quick stories, recollections of things I've seen over the years in property management. The first one uh, was we had a man living in the basement of a property. And that in and of itself isn't terribly uncommon, except this was more of a cellar. The cellar area had a dirt floor that wasn't level. Um, Humidity levels probably somewhere in the 80 to 90% range. Just no light, mold. I mean, the very worst living conditions you could imagine. Ended up being the ex-spouse of an owner of a number of properties. Evidently, they had a falling out, and tenants started complaining about odor and noise coming from the cellar area. And after you know some time, we went by and took a look and verified that somebody was indeed living in there in conditions that were definitely not suitable for a human being to be living in. Um, Another time we had a an eviction that was carried out at a property and successfully completed. A hard to reach window was left unlocked, and the recently evicted tenant climbed in the window and then proceeded to squat in the apartment, requiring another eviction to be completed all over again. So apparently, I don't know if it's changed, but at the time, if you were evicted and you snuck back in and refused to leave, you had to be evicted a second time. So that seems strange, but that's the business. We had a college rentals that we used to manage for the first few years in the business, and I probably got dozens of stories about that. One in particular, every single year, we would probably complete about $5,000 to $6,000, sometimes $10,000 in repairs, replacing walls, rebuilding walls from people being thrown through them. The houses were just absolutely destroyed. And one year they had a party in the basement where someone was thrown through all of the ductwork for a boiler. So it just totally annihilated all of the ductwork for the boiler system down there. That was one of the more memorable parties that they had over there. Um, I've had every excuse I could think of for how the rent doesn't get paid. I had a tenant who actually ended up being really nice, but always behind on the rent, and told me one day her car broke down, so she couldn't pay the rent. At which point, I had to remind her that she didn't own a car. So she kind of, that was a funny conversation that we had there. We had a situation where we had someone move in a friend and didn't tell us. When that person moved out at the end of their lease, the friend refused to move out, so we ended up having to pay them because they became a squatter. So I had to pay them to leave. That actually was a thing for a couple of years where people would squat in an apartment, and you'd essentially have to pay them to go away, which is wild to think about how that could possibly occur. But that was a bit of a fad for a while. Another thing we saw in undergrad college apartments was kids would go away, go home for winter break, and they turn the heat off, but they wouldn't turn it to 55. They'd turn it completely off. And in upstate New York, you're going to freeze the pipes out. So the kids would come back from break after a couple of weeks, and they would call us with an emergency saying the pipes were frozen, and we'd have to rip apart walls and replace everything. I had a couple of kids do that twice, actually, in their tenancy. I guess they didn't learn the first time about that. I had a tenant operating a decorative chimney. They went through a great deal of work to remove everything from around the fireplace, the decorative fireplace, I should say. They removed everything from around the fireplace. It was very clearly communicated verbally and in writing and on the lease that it was decorative only. But they didn't let that stop them. They got everything cleared away, and they went ahead and Had a nice little fire in there until the entire apartment filled up with smoke because the flue wasn't open, and the fire department was called out. That's happened a couple times. We had the one that jumps out the most is I have no idea how this person didn't die. I had a tenant plug in a dryer, um, but she plugged the dryer cord into the wall, the 220, and then affixed it to the back of the dryer. And so it blew out her entire meter. So they had to replace the entire electrical meter, and everyone involved was completely baffled as to how she didn't die, because I, you got to take a moment to kind of wrap your head around how this would happen. She took the dryer cord, not plugged into the dryer, plugged it into the wall, and then attempted to affix it to the dryer. So yeah, that was a good one. It took about a week to get everything fixed. It just blew the meter. It blew everything. Did a lot of electrical damage, and thank God she wasn't killed, because that she had really it was a miracle that she wasn't. So that's just a quick summary of some of the things that have come to the forefront of my mind as far as memories are concerned. There'll be plenty more on the way, so stay tuned for future videos within this theme.